Unless you're a starving filmmaker, you probably can't imagine living on just $5,500 a year.
Maybe if you're a starving grad student.
Yeah, I'll grant you that. Well, what the heck are we talking about? Find out on this episode of the GrowthBusters podcast.
Calling. Call the GrowthBusters. Whoa.
Welcome to the GrowthBusters podcast. Here we discuss our society's addiction to growth, and we do our best to chart a sustainable course for human civilization, because we've got a planet to save. Hi, I'm Dave Gardner, director of the documentary GrowthBusters Hooked on Growth and full-time advocate for sustainable living.
And I'm Erika, co-host and co-producer of the GrowthBusters podcast. For cutting-edge information about our culture's unsustainable love affair with growth and what we can do about it, visit growthbusters.org. All right, Dave, before we dive into our follow-up episode for Decoupling Nonsense, episode 35, let's check our inbox for any listener feedback.
Okay, Erika, and we have more than ever. First of all, an email from Joe Brooks. Joe wrote, "The attached article from The Ticker reports on Traverse City, Michigan. The article, Year-End Reports Show Local Construction, Growth, Crime Trends, presents many statistics about growth, but never mentions any of the problems. Massive traffic problems, sewage, carbon dioxide emissions, waste, homelessness, affordable housing, low wages. Love your podcasts." Well, thanks, Joe. We appreciate your comments, and you're very observant, huh? I find that most media reports either talk about growth or they talk about many of the problems that are created by growth, but they never talk about them both in the same report. The journalists don't like to connect them.
Yeah, and also interesting, Joe brings up crime trends, which I was just reading this weekend about how there's higher crime in higher temperature places, like places in the South.
Yeah. And certainly those media reports don't acknowledge that ending growth might be the solution to those problems. That is almost never going to be in those reports.
Not yet.
Yep, we're working on that. We also had an email from Simon Cole commenting on episode 37 of the GrowthBusters podcast, A Finer Future. "Congratulations on getting another great speaker with rich information, Dave and Erika. The 5 requirements for ZPG, which is zero population growth, that Hunter explains are illuminating, especially with regards to the effect of inequality on population and our ability to mitigate climate change. They are a vast improvement on the usually rather limited solutions of reproductive freedom and women's education. Like you, I'm dubious about turning the train wreck around if it has to be profitable. But I suspect the environment's tsunamic response will force a huge cultural shift towards realizing that physical imperatives trump financial accounting before we're likely swamped, and a few bits and pieces remain to carry on. I have shared your episodes before, but haven't donated. I will this time. Cheers."
Wow, that was really nice. Thanks, Simon.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's really great to be appreciated, and even more important to be appreciated all the way to the bank, because we depend on the financial support of the people who listen to the podcasts and share them in order to keep this nonprofit project running on renewable energy. So thanks for that. But it's a great reminder, Erika, that we don't beg for money often enough. So I'm not going to beg now, but I'm just going to mention if you head over to growthbusters.org, click on the donate button. It's very easy to pitch in and make sure that this continues. And it's real easy to just sign up for a small monthly recurring donation if that works better for your budget.
Indeed.
I do want to thank Don Owens from Australia for writing in. He has some very interesting observations about the growth addiction of Australia's politicians. And I'd love to dig into that, but we just don't have time to share it in this episode. So, Don, keep listening and keep writing, and we will share more of your thoughts when we have a few more minutes to spare.
Thanks, everybody, for writing to us. And again, for helping us keep this project alive. We do it because we love it, but money always does help. So now for our main event, just some commentary from a very special guest and producer of the must-see film, 8 Billion Angels, Terry Spar. And before I share this, I'll go ahead and mention that I was not able to join in, but Dave and I are going to unpack everything at the end, so hang tight. Here's Dave and Terry.
All right, so I'm talking to Terry Spar, the producer of a new film, 8 Billion Angels, and somebody who I consider a comrade in arms in the battle to get our civilization to be more sustainable. And Terry, I asked you to jump on with me today based on an email that you sent me as a follow-up to episode 35 of the GrowthBusters podcast, Decoupling Nonsense. So you kind of took exception, I guess I'd say, to some of the things we said, and rather than me put words in your mouth or even read your email, first of all, let me invite you to just kind of express what your concern was based on that.
When I look at our global economic activity across the planet, oftentimes when I'm in front of people who have just watched our film 8 Billion Angels, they'll say, hey, a great film, but you really didn't concentrate much on reducing consumption as a solution. And I said, that's fairly accurate. And they say, well, why didn't you do that? Or why don't we just reduce consumption? And I said, it's a tall order and a big task to discuss. But I think if you really want to qualify your question, I think probably a better question to ask is, and it's really a $1 trillion question, is what scale or size of global economic activity would be sustainable indefinitely for 7.7 billion people? That's really the question we need to know so that we can live sustainably with the resources we have. So when you do the math and you look at that, and this is just through looking and researching numerous assessments, talking to lots of environmental scientists and economists and ecologists, and they all pretty much concur, Dave, that we need to be at about 50% of our current economic activity globally. And we're an $86 trillion economy. So to live sustainably, again, you have to reduce our global activity by about 50% or about $43 trillion. A substantial reduction in quote-unquote consumption, but it's really economic activity because it's production and consumption. So I think the challenges are really twofold. One is human behavior is one of the issues. And we are programmed to want to live better lives. And it's very, very difficult, especially when the majority of us across the globe are living on so little. Over 4 billion people are living below a sustainable threshold right now, which is a very austere lifestyle. It's essentially living on $5,500 a year. It's not something that anybody would want to live on. So do we prohibit these 4 billion plus people from living a better life? In our film, we have a bioethicist say that we, by social justice, we need to allow these people to have the room and the space to live better lives and to grow and want to consume more. And we shouldn't be prohibiting them from doing so. And on the flip side, the challenge is you got 3.5 billion plus people who are living above that sustainable threshold of $5,500 a year.
And that 5,500 is roughly, by your computation, about the average that all 7.7 billion of us would need to be at.
Mm-hmm. I haven't done the math lately, but it's about what it is. It's rounding a little bit. But so it's a tall order to do that. It goes against human behavior, wanting to either reduce our standards of living. And for many people, that could be as much as 50 to 90% of their lifestyle. I've mentioned to you before, Dave, it's like living in a 10 by 15 room with minimal plumbing and minimal electricity and a plant-based diet, no washer or dryer because you only have a few sets of clothes, and no dishwasher because you only have a few sets of plates and flatware. And
let me interject here that Terry and I were both in the same room a couple of times just a few weeks ago. It was a really great experience at some private screenings of his great film, 8 Billion Angels, talking to college students who were at the screening. And I think in one of those settings, when you explained to us how we would need to live in order to cut that total global economic activity in half, I think I asked for volunteers. I asked for a show of hands. How many of you want to sign up today to live in that small apartment and earn $5,500 a year and adjust your lifestyle to match? How many volunteers did we get raising their hands?
None.
Of course.
The challenge is, and it will happen, is that the folks who are living below that level are going to rise up, and that's just going to cause more damage to the environment. It's a real challenge to reduce consumption, both from a behavior perspective, but then also, as I mentioned in my email to you, Dave, from a financial system. And what I mean by that is when you look at the equation that isn't the impact on our planet, it's the number of us times our affluence. You also hear technology. To me, affluence is your wealth and it's your income, it's your assets. That wealth or income allows you to buy energy and allows you to buy materials and goods and services, and some of that is technology. So I just look at technology as being part of the affluence. So if you're looking at all those 7.7 billion people, their wealth is really the determinant here. And the problem is that and I had to explain this to some fairly smart people out there who said, well, listen, I could just reduce my energy costs by putting in LED light bulbs, or I could stop driving a car, or I did stop driving a car. And I said, well, I think that's fantastic, but let's take the average American who earns $60,000 and they decide to give up a car and walk everywhere. And that car expense to them is probably 10% of their income a year. It's probably $6,000 a year that goes towards their insurance, it goes towards their gas, it goes towards their car payments. But they're obviously not using those resources. The materials that were used to build that car are no longer needing to be extracted from the earth and extruded and fabricated into an automobile. And we're not using the gasoline or the oil that the gasoline's derived from. So a nice resource savings. But I said to them, well, what would you do then if you no longer have that? Would there be a benefit to you economically? And they said, yes, we'd have $6,000. And then my next question was, well, what are you doing with that $6,000? And a light bulb went off in their head, and they all started to realize that, yes, I'm going to take those funds and I'm going to redistribute them or shift them to other economic activities. I could be investing it in the future for my retirement, in which case it's going into the production side of the economy. It's providing the capital to allow businesses to continue to grow, to provide the goods and services that we want. Or it could go on the consumption side where I'm just shifting that $6,000 to other things, like I'm taking a vacation by plane to Europe, or I'm renting a larger home, or I'm keeping my heat on longer, or I'm eating a richer diet. So it's a very difficult task to reduce our overall consumption because it's baked into the financial system that we have. That's why the equation is I equals P times A. It's our affluence. It's not our consumption. It's our wealth. But essentially, Dave, the only thing we really truly can do substantially is either destroy our wealth, voluntarily tear up our money, or take our wealth and our income and purchase, for example, land that we could conserve. And it just takes the money out of the system and puts it into an asset now, which is nature. But beyond that, it's a very difficult challenge to reduce our consumption.
Well, so I think it's good for you to make people aware of that so that they might be more careful. But I kind of got the sense that your feeling is that when Erika and I on the GrowthBusters podcast encourage people to stop using their automobile or to take public transportation or ride their bicycle or definitely turn the lights off so that their energy consumption is less, I can't help but think that that is a part of the adjustments we all need to make to somehow get back within our planetary budget. But are you saying, Dave, you and Erika should really stop recommending that because it is just not going to make a difference?
Well, it's certainly a wasteful use of resources. But then again, if there's an economic benefit to you or Erika, meaning that if you turn your lights off more, you're going to have a lower utility cost. And then what are you doing with those savings? I was in the business world for 25 years, and every CFO that I've spoken with, they're constantly driving for efficiencies, whether it's through consumption reduction of goods and services in the production of what they're trying to make for their business. They're continuously trying to drive for efficiencies, and at the end of the day, it means a greater profit or a greater net income at their bottom line. And any CFO will tell you they're going to keep 3 to 6 months of cash on hand for their operating of their businesses, and then everything else gets reinvested back into the business, either buying other businesses, buying manufacturing equipment, buying technology, inventory, essentially continuing to grow. That doesn't mean that our personal action that we're trying to do is worthless. If one thing, it reinforces that save the planet sort of mentality, which is good. We certainly can try and consume less. The problem is we've been trying to do that for 25, 30, 50 years. And the World Bank, if you look at their global growth on an average annual basis, it's been about 4% since 1961. So we're continuing to grow. Some of that's because of population increase, but a lot of this is because we've had the ability to have abundant energy, which has allowed us to extract more materials and continue to grow our wealth. And we're not putting on the brakes, and we're not really changing our consumption from a behavior perspective. And even if we try and do it, oftentimes it's just being redirected to other areas.
Well, a couple of avenues I want to go down with. One is I found myself after reading your email, I thought, okay, well, if we're not really super careful, then we're just shifting our impact. So I found myself wondering, okay, how many things could I come up with that people can do with their savings that would be environmentally benign or beneficial? So let's see, some of the things I came up with, tell me if I'm on the right track here, are what if you use the savings to pay a higher price for more durable goods rather than buying cheap crap that you're going to have to replace every year or two.
If it costs you more, for example, I buy organic foods, and it's more expensive than the traditional industrialized agricultural system foods.
So grown by people who are taking better care of
who aren't using all the chemical inputs and fertilizers and things like that. That tends to cost a little bit more because the yields aren't as high. So it's good for the environment, and it's also reducing my overall wealth. So I can't consume other goods and services because I'm allocating more of that towards organics. So there's a good example, but it does cost me more personally. And unfortunately, I think most people tend to look for the cheapest goods and services. And we all do that. We all look for typically what is going to give us value at the cheapest cost.
Yep. But I'm thinking if I really have a good impact on somebody, they're going to be spending less money at the gasoline pump. And they're going to stop and say, okay, I got to be really careful. I'm not going to spend that money on another trip to Cabo, but I will spend it on buying something that is repairable and I won't have to replace for 30 years. I will spend it on local food grown much more environmentally carefully that's better for the soil. So those are good places to shift that money. I could use the money I save to sponsor a screening of 8 billion angels.
Yes, we certainly contribute to organizations that are involved in educating girls and providing family planning and helping to overall reduce our footprint by promoting smaller families. Absolutely.
Yeah, you could make contraception free for some group of people.
Mm-hmm.
That would be a good use, yeah.
A very good, useful amount of your dollars, yes.
You could use the savings to invest in solar panels for your roof.
Mm-hmm. I'm still trying to get my arms around renewable energy because there's certainly some questions whether it will have the scalability and the density and the portability to replace our fossil energy. If it was the magic bullet, you'd think we would have been able to at least move the needle, and we're not moving the needle anywhere near quickly enough because of some of the limitations of renewable energy.
So I think that's part of my response and my answer. But the last thing is kind of a big picture question I wanted to pose and see if together you and I can solve this. So let's assume that there's not a huge shift that we can get in the consumption patterns of the richest 3.5 billion people on the planet. We're designing the sustainable civilization of the future. We know it's going to be far fewer than 7.7 billion people. When you do the math in your head and try to figure out, okay, roughly what's going to be the population size, is it going to be based on an assumption that everybody kind of stays at their level of consumption they are today? Or what kind of shifts are we talking about?
Well, again, there are two variables there. One is the number of us and the other is our affluence. And so we're an $86 trillion economy. That's our affluence as a global economy. And we're 7.7 billion people. We have had a very, very difficult time because all our growth and the focus on it across the planet in 200-some countries is about living better lives and pushing the growth numbers. So I don't see growth, which is essentially an outcropping of consumption, as a likely variable that you're going to reduce enough, meaning 50%, to live sustainably. If we don't change growth, we'll keep growing and we don't reduce our growth. Let's just say we stay static. What do we need to do to get down to a sustainable lifestyle? Well, again, it's 50%. We'd have to reduce that number to about $43 trillion. Again, that's allowing for the abundance and diversity of life to flourish. That's a rough approximation of where we need to be.
But you don't think we can do that, right?
Not quickly enough, and nor can we reduce population quickly enough.
Yeah.
But I think it's much harder to reduce consumption based on the systems in place and the political systems, the economic systems, everything that you've had on your podcast for years about trying to slow growth down. It's an extremely difficult task to do so.
Do you see us kind of freezing at today's level of consumption for everybody and then just aiming for cutting the world population in half?
I think voluntarily that's very difficult to do.
On the population side?
On the consumption side.
Oh, on the consumption side. Okay. Mm-hmm.
I think each and every one of us wakes up every day and says, more or less, how can I live a better life, especially for the people who are less well off. So I think consumption is going to continue to go up for a long, long time, as long as energy is made available and abundant for us. If there's constraints in energy, consumption will go down. They rise and fall together, Dave. Energy, material consumption, and global wealth, they rise and fall. And when there's less energy available, there's less consumption of materials, and there's obviously less wealth.
So that kind of brings us to a question. Erika couldn't join us today for this conversation, but she sent me one kind of big picture question that she hoped that we would get to, and you've led me right into it. She said, what is to keep us then from having this final end result being that we have more and more millionaires and billionaires, and we have to reduce the population as consumption continues to grow? We will have to continue to contract the population, and eventually we end up with a couple of million billionaires and nobody else.
You're saying if we want to be sustainable.
Yeah, because our goal is to somehow find a sustainable balance. My thinking was we got to work on both. We've got to really contract the population, but the richest people in the world really need to cut back on their consumption. Mm-hmm. But I'm saying if we are realistic and say, you know what, we're not going to convince anybody to cut back on their consumption. And in fact, you're telling me they're going to keep on wanting to make their lives better year after year, then that means we are going to perpetually have to reduce the population if we want to be in sustainable balance.
I think David Pimentel of Cornell and his collaborators came up with a number, and this was back 15, 20 years ago, based on the economic activity and global wealth at the time. They said it was somewhere between 1.5 billion to 2 billion people is sustainable at those current levels of economic activity. Probably that number's about the same today. It's probably 1.5 billion to 2 billion people is the sustainable level based on the current consumptive levels and the current economic activity of our global average.
But if I'm not successful at getting everybody and every policymaker and every government and every business unhooked from growth addiction, then that would be a momentary point in time of sustainability. We would immediately start getting out of balance.
We're out of balance now. And if we don't tackle one or the other or both, the question is, what's more effective? Is it more effective to get people to try and change their future consumption or reduce the number of future consumers? Well, I had a professor back when I was getting a master's in government administration that said, Terry, you have to look at what's feasible and what's practical. It's a very difficult task to practically bring down, you say consumption, but let's just say economic activity. I think it's a very impractical, very difficult. There's too many moving pieces, too many systems, too many political interests across a massive, complex global system. I think it's certainly far easier to educate people on the impacts of unsustainable population growth and implement both on personal levels and policy levels in governments social, health, and economic benefits of promoting smaller families through education and family planning and policies that promote healthy choices.
Yeah, I wouldn't argue with you at all about that. We've proven that we're willing and able to reduce our birth rate. Mm-hmm. We've made incredible strides already, not incredible enough, but we've proven that we've had many countries who have dramatically dropped their birth rate without any coercive policies, just by rallying the public and educating them and making family planning services available and saying, you know what, we got too many people, we need fewer. We've got success stories there. I don't think we have a single success story where a large group of people or a nation or, any large group said, okay, we've got to reduce our consumption, and everybody rallied and accomplished that. So far, we haven't seen that, right?
No.
Yeah. So you're right that I think it's going to be a lot easier to work on the population side of that equation. I just think we're so far into Overshoot, I feel like we've got to find a way to tackle the economic activity too.
Right. And I think the more people that do understand this, what we're discussing today, the more that they can create policy shifts by getting people to take action by voting their principles, and getting candidates in office who understand this, people who understand this who run for office, whether that's you, Dave, or me, or other people that understand the interconnection of global economic activity and population, and policies that favor moving towards authentic sustainability, not a bunch of policies that really just benefit more economic growth, unfortunately, which we do see.
Yep.
It's a tough balance because politicians are elected because people want growth, they want better lives, but that growth has the corresponding effects of damaging the environment. That's why reducing our numbers will reduce that overall impact.
Well, Terry, I want to thank you for producing 8 Billion Angels. It's a great new documentary about human population, what's going on with that on the planet. Brand new film. Any news or anything you want to share with our listeners about the film?
We just were the select feature film at the American Public Health Association's film festival last week in Philadelphia, which was fantastic. Over 50 films were shown, and We were the select feature, and we had a wonderful panel there with Travis Reeder, who's a bioethicist at Johns Hopkins. He was on it, and he was also in our film. And we had two other lovely folks, Kate Cho, who's with the Gates Foundation, and then a woman named Amita Vyas, who's down at George Washington University. So it was a really terrific panel. We were just accepted into the Jaipur Film Festival, Dave, over in India, because a portion of our film involves India and some of the challenges they're having with pollution and solutions with the model down in Kerala. So, yeah, some really great news there. We've got some other festivals and conferences that we're going to be doing over the next few months. And then our plan is, again, to release in the spring of 2020 the film to across the nation.
So if people want to learn more about it, see the trailer, follow your progress, and make sure they don't miss the news when the film is available for them to see, what should they do? Where do they go?
8billionangels.org.
All right. Do you want to do a quick plug for Earth Overshoot? Earth Overshoot's the nonprofit that we established that is furthering the message and the mission of the film, earthovershoot.org. Yep, I think Terry's got an email list that you can get on there so you don't miss any major news, and we'll all look forward to the film being seen in many communities starting in the spring. Thank you, yeah. Anything we didn't cover that you wanted to talk about? Nothing in particular, but I think I don't want the general feeling to be that there's not something that an individual can do. It's not saying that their personal actions are worthless. They just have to realize that what we're doing isn't going to move the needle enough. We're just not going to be able to reduce our activity enough to be sustainable. We really have to focus on our overall numbers on the planet. And there are things, Dave, that we have to do as a society and as a global society too, which is removing carbon dioxide from the air. We just have to do that. There's too much up there right now for the Earth to absorb naturally. We do have to reduce our overall consumption of energy, but again, very hard to do because when there's taxes or cost to increasing our energy use, all costs go up, and people don't like that, and they revolt. That's a delicate balance between trying to reduce our consumption and our energy by policies that are not something that people necessarily want, but are absolutely necessary from an ecological perspective. You know, and I can't help but think that to some extent you're reacting to what we hear too often. It's shocking that I have to say this, but a lot of people today are pretty uncomfortable talking about population growth, overpopulation, contracting population, or even just stabilizing population. There are always going to be people in the crowd who want to go to, it's a consumption problem. We don't need to deal with population. Why? Because I'm afraid to talk about that, apparently. That's the between the lines, what they're saying. Mm-hmm. You get it, I get it. And I think that's kind of your reaction is, let me fill you in. If you think that we can ignore the population multiplier in that equation. Right. And the key thing is if people say, yes, we can just reduce consumption, well, then really how much? And that's what's important to understand and measure so that people understand the magnitude of the issue. And then they become more open to obviously discussing humane and obviously voluntary policies that are pro-small family. Yeah, we don't have to just pick one. But if you did and you picked working on overconsumption, then you lose. You're never going to get there. Mm-hmm. Fair enough to say that? Where we are now, it ponies out of the gate. Yep. All right. All right. Thanks a lot, Terry. Good to talk to you today. My pleasure. Thanks for your time. You too. Bye-bye. So, Erika, what stood out to you about Terry's response?
Well, first off, I'll say that Terry's perspective is very refreshing. It often feels like our small but growing social circle of friends and colleagues are unfortunately the only ones that really get it. Sure, we have a lot of big names out there who are doing some really great things, all of whom support and encourage ways of reducing our ecological footprints. But it's true that it is a rarity to see anyone actually acknowledge that population part of the equation, and let alone say that reducing our population is an easier mission than reducing our consumption patterns.
Yeah, I guess that's true. We hear that perspective way too seldom. I think it made it pretty obvious in the conversation with Terry that I wasn't completely buying his whole story, which almost seemed to be saying, don't bother to do anything to shrink your footprint, except having fewer children.
I knew you would say something like that, Dave. I anticipated that. I just think really what Terry was trying to get at was individual action. Assuming we all have access to reproductive health and education and resources, and there are no bans in the state that you live in, assuming that we have equal access to these opportunities and resources, that we really do have the power to control our family size. Thankfully, we do, right? In a lot of places we do. So if you have that, that's your own personal action, your own personal contribution to this mission of saving our planet. That's one thing that you can do that, in my opinion, is easier than reducing your ecological footprint by consuming less. I think to ask people to consume less in our modern society is significantly harder to do than saying, I'm not going to have any kids, or saying, I'm only going to have one child. And the reason is because it's just the modern world that we live in, where everything around us really shapes our behaviors. You can make the argument that it really does shape our reproductive decisions and choices to have, but I think we still have a little bit more control over that aspect of our future than, say, driving less. I bring that example up because...
Why? Why do you bring that up?
If you've been following along, you know that my New Year's resolution this year was to drive less.
Was?
Oh, gosh. Thank you. Thank you for the call out. But you know what? I'm going to be very honest with you guys. Like, no BS about it. We don't like to BS here on GrowthBusters, so I'm going to tell it like it is. It has been a harder task than I imagined. And the reason is because I live over a mile away from any market, from really anywhere I want to go. And, you know, I really enjoyed the walks and not having to drive everywhere. But at the end of the day, when you have other responsibilities, your job, I have 3 jobs, and it's harder than I actually anticipated, having to account for time and the time to get to A to B to pick up my groceries, A to B to go to the gym, and having to really calculate and make sure that that fits in my day where I'm able to get everything done in a tight deadline. So I'm still on it. I'm going to also take my own advice by not calling it a failure. Yes, I'm driving less, but I won't lie and tell you that I'm not driving at all, because I have been.
So are you saying you've made the decision based on this experiment that you're not getting rid of your car? This isn't going to happen this year?
Well, no. Let's say if I get into a graduate program, which will be around April is the last I will know of, I'm going to make plans to relocate and make sure that I relocate to somewhere that I am able to walk to campus, to anywhere I really need to get to on a daily or weekly basis. So selling my car will happen. I will do this. I'm committed to this. It's just a matter of when. Definitely this year I want to do this, and I will definitely keep you all posted.
Wow. Well, you might need a bicycle or a hoverboard or both, but that's cool.
I have friends actually offering me their unused bicycles, so maybe I won't have to buy one.
But I will give you and Terry this, that having one fewer child or having no children, I mean, there is nothing more powerful in terms of footprint shrinking action. That is the most powerful. And you're right. You can make that decision, and as long as you're willing to use some form of contraception, it isn't hard because you've made the decision. And you don't have to every day shiver because you turned down your thermostat in the winter, or you don't every day have to say, God, I wish I could have a big T-bone tonight, but I'm a vegan now. So in that respect, it is. But of course, we're so far into Overshoot that I think it makes sense to still work on both angles. And I can't tell you, Erika, how many people do say to me, well, I didn't have any kids, so I did my part. So I'm flying. I'm eating meat.
Well, you know what? I'm one of those people. I'm not having kids. I still eat meat. But I've been in a constant state of cognitive dissonance with myself every single time I have a meal where there's meat, because I know what it took to get that meal on my plate. Eventually, I hope to wean myself off of it. I think we're actually planning on having another special guest on our podcast who is a vegan. That would be Mr. Joshua Spodek.
Oh, Josh? Is he a vegan?
I'm pretty sure Joshua is a vegan, if not vegetarian, but I'm really curious to hear his take and advice for how to do that, which is something else I want to offer if I didn't already offer that for a New Year's episode. But if you are looking to make major changes like this in your life, find heroes, find people who are where you want to be and ask them, how did you get there? I mean, that's how I found Dave. So,
well, I was just thinking we want Dave and Erika to be that. We can be your heroes, baby.
That's what's up.
But if you're trying to give up your car, actually, neither one of us can be your hero yet in that department. But I'm on my bicycle a lot, so I can be your partial hero. And I know we need to return to unpacking that conversation with Terry, but I do want to mention that just last weekend, I was on a family trip. I had to fly one of the few times I'm going to be getting on a plane this year, maybe the only time. But I was at a 95th birthday party and in a number of situations where I just, had a little less control over my diet. And so I was having meat 2 meals a day for a couple of days.
Oh.
And usually I go 3, 4, 5, 6 days without meat. So I come back home and it was so nice just to have a stretch of vegetables only and no meat. And you know what? That saves you a lot of money. But you do have to find ways to get your protein.
Yeah, going back to the propaganda that is Andrew McAfee's book, More from Less, the surprising story of how we learn to prosper using fewer resources and what happens next. Dave, one of the major issues we had with the messaging here was McAfee's goal of helping the poor become rich and how technology is somehow going to save us all, which is unfortunately something that we hear too much. But with over 3 billion people, and actually I think Terry said about 4 billion people living below the poverty line in the world, I'm strongly motivated by helping these people rise out of poverty so that they can have better lives.
I thought you just wanted them to stay dirt poor so that you could eat meat.
Terrible. No, no. I guess the point is if we continue to deny the seat that population reduction deserves at the sustainability table, we are setting ourselves up for the ultimate failure. And at the end of the day, we are faced with our own personal decisions and decisions that actually do matter. And we know that decisions matter because one decision can influence a series of future decisions that are not only yours, but they're the decisions of other people around you. And I'm not going to dive further into this rabbit hole because it'll just take forever and we have limited time. But something that Terry said that really stuck with me was that consumption will go up as long as energy is available to us. Energy, consumption, and wealth all rise and fall together. So in other words, less energy equals less consumption equals less wealth. This was interesting to me because it's not typically the way that I think about it. And I really like what hearing this activated in me because it begs the question of, is energy infinite? I know this is probably going way off topic, but if energy is neither created nor destroyed, we can say that it is infinite. But let's just say that the energy we have today is what we will have indefinitely because it's neither created nor destroyed, right? So it seems that there's only so much to be dispersed around the growing masses of people.
Well, I just have two things to say about that. One is, there's a tremendous amount of energy hitting the planet every day, and I think we could power billions and billions and billions more people with that energy. We could figure that out if that was the only challenge. Certainly energy is a really key player in quality of life and the size of our economy, and the cost of energy plays a really significant role, but I don't see energy as the limiting factor. I think it's all these other things in our ecosystems: fresh water, fish in the ocean, fertile soil, phosphorus. There are so many other things that are going to keep us from being able to hit 11 billion, let alone the idea of 15 or 20 billion. We could figure out how to power 20 billion people on this planet from the sun. We could figure that out. But we couldn't figure out how to keep from completely destroying every other aspect of our life support system. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I think what this is getting at is this belief out there that is that if we have unlimited amounts of energy, or we have enough energy to go around forever, then we can somehow create technologies to, create water when it's no longer available to us, or create better or more energy efficient ways of using that energy. It's just we haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah, and wouldn't you say, I've been kind of blown away by just the number of people who have reached out to us after our episode, Decoupling Nonsense, to say, I couldn't believe that Sam Harris just bought that hook, line, and sinker and didn't push back on that whole cornucopian myth that Andrew McAfee was pushing.
Yeah. And I think that has a lot to do with reputability. The guy comes from MIT, Harvard, and having that behind your name, unfortunately, captures the attention of a lot of people and in ways that just ultimately bias their opinions of that person and whatever it is that they're saying. They'll just eat it up without really questioning, does this make sense?
I have 3 letters to add at the end of his name, BFD.
Yeah. But I mean, in addition to that, he kind of also clouded the BS of his messaging with some good ideas. I liked the idea of a carbon tax. It wasn't all BS, but there were just enough points in that book that just really, unfortunately, poo-poo the whole thing.
Well, I just want to be clear, you can or cannot buy into this. You have a free mind, Erika, but I want to be clear about my position on this because I keep thinking about your desire to find a way for people to rise out of poverty. I think that is a noble goal, and I think everything we do needs to be consistent with that. And so, to me, there are 2 things that are consistent with that. One is, well, there have to be a lot fewer of us. And I'm not saying that means there needs to be fewer poor people to rise out of poverty. There just needs to be fewer human beings on the planet. And then secondly, there does need to be more equitable distribution. Sorry to say, I'm not 100% anti-capitalist and not 100% pro-socialist, but those of us in the overdeveloped world who are really living high on the hog, part of the equation's got to be us living a little bit more simply. That's my position.
Absolutely. I agree with you completely about that.
It's a good thing.
I'd be out of a job. Neither one of us is for saying that there needs to be fewer people in developing countries. If anything, I would say there needs to be fewer of us here in developed countries. We need to be the ones that are setting this example. And I know that I sound like a broken record when I say it, but we are so privileged. We have everything that we will ever need. And we need to be able to give some of that up so that the other people on the other side can rise out of poverty so that they can have just a fraction of what we have every single day. They deserve it.
Good point. Yeah, the pie isn't getting any bigger, so we have to slice the pie a little differently. And if you're not anxious to really have a small piece of the pie, then you better be anxious to talk about human overpopulation, address the subject, and do something about it.
Exactly. And beyond that, if there's anything that you take from this episode, I would just say that we should all be motivated by what is morally correct. And I know that that's very subjective because most of us are motivated by what we individually consider morally correct. In fact, even the most immoral human finds a way to rationalize his or her behavior that aligns with whatever they believe to be is ethically and morally correct. But if you personally do not believe that a part of social justice involves allowing people on the other side of the richest nations of the world access to the space and resources to make for better lives, then there is an absolute error in your judgment, hands down.
And you should run for the Senate.
Thank you. All in all, every single human on this planet already living, every single human that is already living, already alive, is already going through this process that we call life, deserves the freedom and the space to have equal access to food, to water, to healthcare, to professional and educational opportunities, clean air, all of that. And if you're denying somebody that, if you think it's more important for you to have more than one child, no offense to anybody who's listening to this and already has more than one child. I'm not calling you out or anything. You are aware. Now it is your job to pass the torch and to spread the message to other people who are making these sorts of decisions, because it could be us on the other side.
Well, amen to that. Podcast adjourned. Anything else?
I just want to say that I very much look forward to the release of Terry's film, 8 Billion Angels. And also, there is another one scheduled to air in the beginning of 2020, I believe spring 2020. It's David Attenborough's film, A Life on Our Planet.
Yep, looks like that might be interesting. And an update on Terry Sparr's film, 8 Billion Angels. Terry tells me that they are in the process of not just organizing the world premiere, but actually organizing screenings in 40 or 50 cities around the United States in the coming months. So you definitely want to keep listening to us. We'll keep you updated, but we'll put links in the show notes again so that you can get over to the 8 Billion Angels website and get on his email list so that you don't miss any news. And you'll have the ability to say, hey, Terry, I'm willing to do what I can to bring your film to my town.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess that does bring us to the end of another exciting episode of the GrowthBusters podcast. Don't forget to explore the issues at growthbusters.org. And if you think this podcast is as important as we think it is, then by all means, subscribe to it on your podcast app and recommend it to your friends. There are not enough people listening to it yet, because when there are, we will see the world changing, because we've got all the solutions, don't we, Erika?
We're getting there. Thank you to all of our listeners for offering your support and for allowing us to do this meaningful work. And thank you, Terry Spar, for enlightening all of us with your words and the message of your 8 Billion Angels film.
All right. Peace out.
Some may dream to pave mountains and streams, but not me. I'm a growth buster. Some may just want more, but don't know what it's for, but not me. I'm a growth buster. Don't want a solution at the cost of pollution. They think bigger is better at the cost of the weather, but no, not us. We are the growth busters. Calling, 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 calling. Call the growth busters.